do a lot around food security, internet access, and of course, housing, our primary mission in that regard, and increasingly have looked towards innovating economic mobility programs, and certainly partner with some of the folks on this panel, in the room, in the virtual room, on a number of other programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And joining us virtually, we have Jason Andrade from Compass. Jason, can you unmute yourself and give a quick introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to Zoom in today with everybody here. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in person, but this is certainly a wonderful event, and Midas does great work. So I'm Jason Andrade. I'm the Director of Financial Services at Compass Working Capital. For folks who may be not familiar with Compass, Compass is a financial services organization that's focused on helping low to moderate income families build wealth, specifically in partnership with public housing authorities like BHA, to deliver or help them deliver their FSS program, which stands for Family Self-Sufficiency. So our part is to help with the administration of that program, but at the core of it is to provide financial coaching to households, to work on a number of different items, from credit to savings to long-term asset building like retirement and home ownership. In my role, I work specifically providing oversight of the staff, professional development, and really working to build municipal, regional, and national partnerships, referrals, and whatnot, so that we can get services to our clients that they really need. There's a number of things that families that we're working with look to achieve, and barriers that come up, and certainly we'll have some of that in this discussion today, which I'm looking forward to. But that's a little bit about our work, and really excited to be on this panel and talk to you more about it.
Thank you so much, Jason. So I want to center the discussion a little bit about, you guys all did great introductions, talked a little bit all the organizations that you guys work for, in terms of how different the work is or how similar the work can be. Can you guys talk a little bit about the difficulties that maybe post-pandemic you have faced in terms of breaking down the silos that you face working in your lane or in your industry, and how we can leverage more collaboration to leverage some more of those resources amongst different organizations and agencies? Mimi, you want to start?
Sure. So that's a mouthful. I think that first I can talk a little bit about what we do at the Office of Financial Empowerment and what the Tax Coalition does. And so for folks who kind of aren't familiar with our work, for the past 20 years through the City of Boston and through EITC, which is the parent organization of the Boston Tax Help Coalition, I've created a coalition that has become both citywide as well as regional, and then have done a lot of work nationally as well, to really help to build and expand the tax equity field, both through policy strategy as well as individual service through tax preparation. And so the tax preparation is part of the VITA movement, which is Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, which is a partnership with the IRS, SPEC, which is Stakeholder Partnership Education and Communication. But the VITA field is really kind of in the whole way that it is structured is really about strategic partnerships. So as a VITA provider and as a coalition effort, we are kind of the situs of crafting a whole coalition in Boston, and then assisting regionally to tie that together through the work that we do through the Office of Financial Empowerment as the Boston Tax Help Coalition, through doing training and individual tax preparation at tax sites, which are community-based trusted partners, right? So through organizations like Action for Boston Community Development, we have a site in one of the BHA locations, through community health centers, a whole host of partners kind of at our pre-pandemic height, when we were doing 13,000 tax returns every year for probably a decade. we had a maximum of, say, 40 sites doing 13,000 returns, and then another, say, 10,000 across the region. And so the pandemic hits, all that stuff has to shut down, and we figure out a way through partnerships, both locally as well as regionally, to create a virtual process. And so we know that, as all of us know, the pandemic kind of laid bare the institutional racism and the issues around equity that we all know through our work we've seen. And so we kind of tried to address that. Coming out of the pandemic, I think we're moving into a tax season where we're going to continue to do this work through both virtual as well as in person. You know, we learned a lot through what happened with the stimulus, you know, understanding that there are significant silos when you think about the way the federal government provides services and resources, and we can talk about that, you know, what that looks like. But we've learned a lot. On the other hand, I think that we're moving into another season where we're going to have to do this work virtually as well as in person, and kind of address some of the silos that we know are out there.
Thank you, Mimi. Joel, BHA for many, many years has always had strong partnerships in the community with a lot of the CBOs. During the pandemic or post-pandemic, what would you say have been one of the strongest partnerships that really have allowed to support your residents and support the work that the BHA has been doing maybe prior to the pandemic?
I think that, so in terms of our pandemic response and the partnerships with community organizations, some of the strongest, most visible have been they're referred to technically as ASAPs, or Aging Senior Access Points, but organizations like Ethos, in the very, I just lost several names, but all of our wonderful elder service partners that serve the whole portfolio. And the reason I'm listing those immediately is because we have a small fraction of staff at BHA that work on resident services. We don't really have a central way of funding it, but they do an incredible job. And what that means is that effectively our public housing, our operations staff end up working with community organizations to fill in the gap that government is not funding. Some of that with seniors and persons with disabilities, you know, if you think about the pandemic, food security, internet access, vaccination, right? And obviously vaccination being one of the most, you know, dominant public things. We worked with, you know, we worked with our, the senior care nonprofits to help promote and facilitate vaccination clinics across our elderly portfolio. And we pulled in local pharmacies as well when there's a lot of uncertainty about how that would work. I would just note that in addition to community-based, we ended up, it's basically, we partnered with community organizations and small businesses, and then internally have really prioritized also language access as a huge, for years, as a huge part of something that, you know, the BHA does. So thinking about that, but we worked with some of the same partners, again, which is, and I should say, Boston EMS as well, city services as well, kind of overlaid with nonprofit partners in different ways to do that work, to do food access, similarly a city office, nonprofit partners, private vendors, and our staff. And then as you kind of heard, kind of coming into this, the financial empowerment work, the tax credit. I mean, one of the things to think about in all these, where there's stimulus payments or child tax credit or whatnot, is we do have folks we have a number of folks who are solo income. They may not normally be filing tax returns, which means in order to access benefits, they really need to work with the partnerships like those that Mimi and her peers and all the coalition partners help convene to make sure that people are really accessing the full suite of it. So it's not, I could just keep rambling on like this, right. But basically, you know, we've had a multi-layered, and it is kind of internal public agency, public partnerships, nonprofit and community organization partnerships, and then also private partners or sometimes support from higher levels of government as well. Really making things work.
Thanks, Joel. I think that's a great example of all the different ways that we can continue to share examples of how these partnerships really benefit our residents and the folks that we serve in our organizations. Jason, Compass Working Capital is leading in the FSS Family Self-Sufficiency Program. Can you talk a little bit about the program and maybe talk a little bit about how it's thinking about expanding or additional collaborations to make that program available to more residents?
Yeah, sure. You know, for us, partnerships are critical to the success of our work in our organization. We can't do this without our partners, specifically our great public housing partners, such as, you know, Boston Housing Authority or Cambridge Housing Authority or Metro. These are all partners. Recently, you know, about a year or two ago, we did launch the partnership with BHA. And what we've done is we've really shifted, I think, even before the pandemic happened, you know, we were thinking about how can we streamline processes as much as possible so that we can enroll as many participants as possible. You know, FSS has huge possibility. You know, there's a number of eligible families across the country that can really benefit from the program, but are just not able to access the program. So we were thinking, how can we help, you know, some of those barriers that these programs have in terms of running these programs, running a successful FSS program. And some of those challenges is, you know, just the enrollment process, very paper heavy, or, you know, connecting outreach and enrollment with folks, and then escrow management. So even before, really before the pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated and completely shifted our organization. To develop a fully digital or fully remote enrollment process, to invest in tools so that we can coach remotely. So, you know, all of our staff is working remotely. We all can coach remotely via Zoom and phone call, and that's what the majority of our appointments look like. And also investing now beyond in other tools, I should say, like a coaching app, which we're working for, so we can increase, you know, access, connectivity between our staff and our individual clients. Also investing in software and working with digital, you know, some software developers to develop software that helps with escrow management, which has been a big pain point. We've done that locally. Again, that has accelerated. We've increased our staff tremendously. I think as an organization, we've increased over by 50%. We've doubled our staff in the last year. We continue to invest in our partners to enroll as many folks as possible, and really working in the other end, not just the public housing authorities, but also looking at an opportunity specifically in the multifamily space. So a few years ago, through advocacy, federal laws were changed to essentially allow private vendors of housing, so private property owners, to also run FSS programs. So that's a huge opportunity and a huge possibility. So we've launched a digital network called FSS Link that, you know, has best practices, webinars to help expand those tools to these multifamily properties across the country, nationally, and also to smaller property residential coordinators who are running FSS, you know, by themselves often. Like Joel mentioned, the resident service coordinators do a lot of great work, but they don't always have all the resources. And also, you know, we're also expanding and doubling down on this idea of partnering with public housing authorities. So we've seen that with our recent expansion or partnership with another financial coaching organization, Clarify, and working with the Philadelphia Housing Authority. So we look to replicate that model to continue to, you know, really leverage these digital tools as much as possible to streamline the program so that it's easier for people to connect and it's easier for our partners in the housing space to run these programs. And also continuing to leverage these bigger partnerships in the multifamily and the public housing space to grow nationally as much as possible. And that's really been our main efforts to try to create, you know, expand our partnerships and get more people enrolled into FSS.
Thank you, Jason. You touched a little bit about streamlining the processes and making things easier. I'm curious, how do you guys see the processes that you currently face within your organizations as obstacles or challenges in terms of coming out of these silos? Are you able to identify maybe a process that if done in a different way, if broken down differently, would help us collaborate better?
I mean, one of the things that I think about is the lessons that we learned from the stimulus payments, and then seeing how then the implementation of the advanced child tax credit resources coming out of the Biden administration, kind of seeing how that worked and how dysfunctional it was at the same time. Because I live in the world of taxes, right? So my world is under Treasury and the IRS, and that all lives under the Department of Treasury. The money that came out of the stimulus payments came out of Treasury. They actually were able to partner and share data with Veterans Administration, with Health and Human Services, maybe not Health and Human Services, maybe just SSA, the Social Security Administration. And we kept on waiting for additional partners to get into that, right? And so that what ended up happening was that at the beginning of when that money started to flow, the folks who got it without any real muss and fuss had already been filers, had already been in the system, or were in one of those other systems. Lots of other people did not have access because they weren't filers. They had to then go into an IRS portal to get their information into the system. That was remarkable though, right? Because Treasury shared data with the VA and with the Social Security Administration. And so some people who one might have thought might not have received the stimulus payments did in fact get them because of that crossover. When you look at what's happening with the advanced child tax credit, it's only going through the IRS and Treasury. So one would think, oh, well, of course they should partner with Health and Human Services, right? Because that's where all the children are. That's where the TFDC or welfare or SNAP or those places. There's not that partnership. And then when you think about, so what happens to kind of folk on the ground that don't get this deposit automatically, then they have to work with intermediaries, if you will. So say the tax coalition would be seen as an intermediary. We can assist people by helping them get through the portal, assist them by doing their taxes so that they get in the system and get these tax payments. One of the things that in terms of how do you make it better, I know that there was a lot of advocacy that took place in between ARPA, right, the American Rescue Plan, which crafted and expanded the child tax credit from the stimulus. And folk spent a lot of time explaining to the federal government what could have been better if you did more sharing. What has happened is that in the proposal coming out of Chairman Neal from House Ways and Means is to put $9 billion towards the IRS for the expansion of the child tax credit and $1 billion to Treasury to support the interdepartmental activities, including outreach, data sharing, and efforts to work with other federal agencies to facilitate cross-enrollment. Now, this was the proposal, right? This was as of September. This one probably won't pass, right? We don't know what's going to happen in terms of this federal money and how they're going to do this, but that's kind of as good as you get right now. I mean, ultimately, I think that we all know that Congress makes the laws, right? And if Congress said, this is what we want you to do and do it this way, Treasury, do it this way, Department of Health and Human Services, you could actually change things, but until the laws are changed and then implementation changes, then you kind of have people scrambling at the municipal level to try to assist folk to get access to stuff. So it really is thinking about what happens on the federal level, on the state level, on the city level, and then with intermediaries and CBOs that assist with implementation.
Great point. Thank you for breaking that down, Mimi Jo.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump back a second to where Jason left off, but to try to answer this question. So this is probably basic to anyone who's watching, but I just want to make sure. So family self-sufficiency, right? In public housing, you pay 30% of income. It's relatively similar for comparable programs, sort of between 30 and 40. And this allows people to earn, to kind of earn income, additional income, put in escrow, and really benefit hugely. Before I really answer the question, I want to first just say compasses. I think Jason jumped into the weeds and really talked in a detail level about what the work that they're doing and how they're changing some practices. But I think from a high level, a lot of people don't necessarily do the enrollment very well. And the changes that Compass and BHA are implementing are dramatically increasing enrollment. And that's going to help hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I think if we do this and other people don't, BHA could have the largest program in the country or very close to, which we are nowhere near the size of some housing authorities, but we'll be in certainly the top three, right, on this program. But on the innovation note in silos, right? So BHA is a regional entity. We own property in Boston, but we run Section 8 really in Eastern Massachusetts, or much of it, as well as up North Shore, Merrimack Valley. There's like a city and property ownership focus, and there's a regional service delivery, right? And people are in a housing market that doesn't, it is impacted by, but not totally controlled by municipal boundaries. So that's an interesting facet of how we work as managing different kinds of programs. But so FSS primarily right now is active in our leased housing or our voucher programs. And that's great. And the voucher programs and partners, similarly regional, national nonprofits, right, used to serving people in a distributed case management fashion, whereas public housing is a locally, neighborhood, community-based, tenant task force-based way of doing business. So in some ways, as we look to expand really back into the public housing portfolio, it's a question of innovating in terms of, well, maybe there's a very low-tech way of doing this in terms of door-to-door resident trust building and using tenant leadership, but also, maybe we can take some of the, all the innovations happen in this distributive services, remote platforms, and can't you really apply some of the same ideas while also taking the relational aspect of, living and working next to one another? So I think that that's an area where, as we're really, thinking about as a country reinvesting in housing in a different way, at least debating it, can we also say, well, the innovation can happen there too. It doesn't mean we can't learn from other kinds of programs, or service delivery, but why don't we, take it back to where people live, and if people live in, in community, then let's think about how to use those channels while bringing the technological and remote innovations along.
Thanks, Joel. Jason, did you have something to chime in on that question?
Well, thank you, Joel, for providing that context. It's helpful, especially for folks who are not fully familiar with FSS. I think the only piece that I think I'll add here is I want to spend time more on how these silos impact maybe individuals. I think Mimi and Joel have talked great about organizations and in a higher level, but we're individually, there's a number of different silos that exist within these, benefit programs such as SNAP or cash benefits and whatnot. And what we find is that because many of these programs do not work together, right, as Mimi discussed, they don't work in concert, they don't share information, often it can be very difficult or confusing for folks to navigate. So, and depending on the program, certain programs have what we call asset limits. So essentially, if you earn or you have save over a certain amount of money, one particular program is SSI, then you could be at risk of losing that benefit. And sometimes these benefits don't fully coordinate. So I think in terms of these silos, they can be hugely problematic into the individuals that we work with and the individuals that we serve, just because it's extremely difficult to navigate, and it can be sometimes a disincentive for them to build wealth, build assets, and move forward in their life. What's really, I think, what we've done, and I think ultimately it has to be addressed at a federal, state level, right? Rules and laws have to change. There has to be greater conversation and coordination within these different departments, so that they really are thinking about it holistically and how these programs impact individual families together. But what we found that's really important is just building robust partnerships and referral networks within the community. So we work really hard to make sure that we have a voice at the table. We participate in different panels, conversations like this, different organizations, or certainly different state initiatives. It may be so that we have a voice at the table, we're aware of what's going on, and we can share some of these stories, client stories, to hopefully decision makers, people who do have a voice, who can impact or ultimately change some of these rules in the future. So I just think that's been, not only is it frustrating for, these programs, it's really frustrating in the individual level for individuals for families that we're working with who are receiving these benefits. The silo doesn't make it easier to navigate. And specifically, I think folks have heard of what, the cliff effects, right? This idea that if you receive too much benefits or too much income, you could have a cliff or lose a number of benefits and actually be behind. And I think this is important just because it really impacts individuals and their trust for the organizations, right? So if we have poor referrals, and we see this all the time, we send folks places, they have a bad experience, things are not working the way they're intended to do. They could lose trust for us as an organization working with them, right? Like what kind of referral was this? But I think a bigger issue is losing trust for the system, right? And losing trust for all these programs that they actually benefit, which can be a really, a downward spiral.
Mimi, you touched on what I like to call a hot topic right now with this ARPA money. In terms of, I guess, wish lists and things that your particular organizations are advocating for this federal money, which is a lot of money, a once in our lifetime type of money coming down. What are some, and you mentioned some numbers there, Mimi, but what are additional impacts of that ARPA funding that you can see that your organization can benefit from and help breaking down those silos?
Well, so my organization is not getting any direct ARPA money, other than maybe $100,000 that will be passed through the Office of Workforce Development. So the Office of Workforce Development, as part of EITC, I think is getting 1.8 million as part of this round of ARPA, and we're getting 100,000 maybe through that. And so we're going to be doing some additional advanced digital literacy and doing some additional work around credit building and have a little wish list. I'd say that my wish list, if I kind of was the czarina for the day and I could spend the money the way I wanted to, I would create financial opportunities in all of the key neighborhoods in the city that need them. So that would be East Boston, Mattapan, Hyde Park. I mean, we have one financial opportunity center in Roxbury and in Nubian Square. And so we have full-time coaches and we do credit building and we have a tax coalition there. And so I would roll that out and create the opportunity for that level of service delivery in every single neighborhood that needs it. I would also create infrastructure of community organizers and community lawyers who could start doing work around addressing the systematic racism that was discussed by our keynote today, right? I mean, obviously it's not about individual, I mean, we all want to do individual wealth building, and that's what we do, and you change the world one person at a time, but you also can't change the world unless you do systematic infrastructure change. And so having really great coalitions like this, or like our Bank On coalition, or the work that all of these partners do, there's great capitalists and then there's capitalists who get in the way. I heard a really exciting talk by Jermaine Greer. I don't know if people know him. He used to be at Prosperity Now, and he just started an organization with Solana Rice. They left Prosperity Now and they created something called Generation Liberation, right? And they're trying to create a liberation economy. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Get out of the way. So, I mean, I guess that would be my, I'm a community organizer by trade and in my heart. And I think that we need to obviously do as much as we can do for individual wealth building, but do every kind of systematic infrastructure change to address systematic racism and inequality.
I love that, Mimi. Joel, what does the BHA have in mind for this federal funding, and how do you see it impacting or enhancing those collaborations that the BHA currently holds?
Yeah, so first I want to thank Mayor Janey and the Boston City Council for appropriating money to the BHA for internet access, food security, some housing search assistance, and some other emergency aid to tenants. A lot of these are really tenant-facing benefits for things that we're not funded for. As far as where the state or federal government, well, if we're talking about the rescue plan funds, I think where the state could go with what's been appropriated. I guess I would just note that there's a lot of great state-funded housing authorities in Massachusetts. There's a great division at the Department of Housing and Community Development. I know that there's a lot of talk about housing money, but the governor's put forward a proposal that doesn't put a dollar towards public housing. So I would suggest that that is a omission. And I think that both to the people who live, the tenants who live in state public housing, and also for the incredible people that work in that state office, I think they deserve the resources to do their work well and to live in safely and in quality homes. And as far as the federal government goes, I hope they do the same for federally funded public housing, as well as to retrofit it to meet the climate needs that we have. Sometimes people ask, like, what are the actual physical needs? And there, we could talk a lot about more about like social programming or economic empowerment. And I think I'm not going to go there because I think my colleagues here will cover it to the, but there's a lot of just with public housing. It's like we have, probably we have billions of dollars of roof to fix, basically, or hundreds of millions of dollars of roof to fix, boilers to replace, things like that. And that's the stuff we get calls about. I mean, you need to put the capital resources into housing so that people, live in, they have healthy homes, fix the roof leaks and like plumbing issues, and upgrade the heating systems, and, change the energy sources, so that the routine things that public officials get called about, like, there's mold creeping into a unit, which is a real thing that extremely low-income tenants have to deal with, that we can actually get at the root cause, which is that we've disinvested from where the poorest people in society live. So sorry, that's my answer. Actually fund it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
That's right, yeah.
Jason, what do you see Compass aiming for in terms of ARPA funding, or who are you collaborating with in advocating for the needs of the FSS program on a federal level or local level? I apologize.
Sure. I think similar, just to add on, or similar to what Mimi and Joel said, I mean, Compass isn't directly receiving this ARPA funding. However, we strongly advocate, I think as Joel said, we want to see more money in the hands of our public housing partners. The more funding they essentially can get, the more they can allocate to coordinator dollars or resident coordinators. And somewhat that flows to us in some degree. In terms of advocacy, and who we're working with necessarily, we're not necessarily, we do have some work that we do in the public policy sphere, and at the local level, advocating certain changes or whatnot, but we're really just in complement to our public housing authority partners and whatnot, and really supporting the advocacy that they're having to receive more of this ARPA funding specifically. So I would just add, we're not specifically receiving the funding, but we certainly are advocating and supporting our public housing partners and other partners that we work with to receive some of this funding, because it will impact us and our clients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, at this time, I don't know if we have a temperature check in terms of where we are, but I did want to open it up to the panel if they had any final thoughts that they want to add or leave our guests with before we wrap up.
I have a question for Joel. I mean, I am a public housing person, worked in public housing before I went to law school, and care deeply about public housing and bricks and mortar. And so I guess my question is, I agree with everything you said in terms of putting resources into the physical plant and understanding that HUD has really stopped funding the physical plant, and that ultimately their goal is to turn all of the public housing into vouchers. Is there a strategy to push back on that? Because my feeling is really, in some ways, for a lot of us, it's about bricks and mortar and the land, right? I mean, if people don't have control of their own homes, their own land, bricks and mortar, then when the tide shifts, everybody can kind of be dissipated. So how do we save public housing and strengthen it? How do we do that?
Only small questions today. So yeah, I'll answer. I'll maybe give a sentence or two, and then maybe I'll pass a question to Jason, and we can close the loop there. So I think that there are really great people working at HUD who are trying to innovate. I mean, sometimes programs are structured in a really inflexible way and can be innovated. And I think there are people who are looking at how we can expand them. And I'm going to I think we need to. I do think that in terms of public housing or other basically socially controlled housing, I think we need to advocate really strongly for it. And I think that's the primary way. But in a less sort of, I don't know, abstract answer, I also think that there are concrete efforts to maximize, to work through the difficult details of programs that exist and maximize the resources that are actually out there. So, today we have fewer public housing units in really across the country than we did 20 years ago. We have the authority to go up to that federal level of subsidy. If we can figure out how to deploy it, if we have partners to invest in the capital, we could actually add new units. Councilor Bach in Boston has been really harping on that point. I think the HUD recapitalization office has been harping on that point. So that's something where I think if we really figure out the plan for it, we can actually address the housing demand that's out there. I do think that part of the thing with the existing housing stock is just putting in the capital funds, and we just need to keep fighting for it. And it's really like every level of government and approach. So I'm gonna do, if that's okay, Catherine. I'm gonna pivot. But I maybe to Compass, it's interesting because it seems like in concept when we have these programs that help people avoid cliffs or help build assets, that we could potentially touch like almost every tenant theoretically, right? And I guess my question is very general one. It's like, how far can we go in it? Or what are the real goals we should be setting if we had an almost infinite resource? Like, is it every household? Is it, or how far can we go in Boston or Massachusetts with programs like FSS or other things that really give people that tremendous asset building opportunity? So there's another small question.
I don't have much to add here. I think I would agree, strongly agree with what Joel said here. I think there's a lot of innovation that can happen at the federal, state level, and really rethinking a lot of these programs. I think, a lot of my work and all of these programs, but I like to always think about the individuals, right? And taking it back to the individuals that we serve. I think advocacy is so important, in having a voice at the table and being, and having these conversations is really important to changing this. I think we all kind of realize there needs to be structural changes that need to happen, and a more holistic view of how these programs are funded, how they're working, how they're impacting individuals, and what are those outcomes for those individuals need to be taken into these conversations, instead of just purely output focus, which is like what numbers and focus. So I think for me, it's just, continuing the advocacy, continuing to push for partnerships, innovation at the federal level, and really advocating, like Joel said, FSS has tremendous potential. I'm always not surprised anymore, but really struck by how many few that are outside the space, very few folks have heard about it and know about this program. So I just think there's a lot of potential out there, and it really just starts with advocacy and really thinking about the individual level and how these programs are impacting those folks. So I'll leave it there. I think Joel and Mimi have really said it well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think for me, I just want to add, this is such a great panel of just strong thought partners on so many of these issues. And you guys, I think, are really intentionally looking at ways to break down the silos. So I want to make sure that you guys are congratulated for that. And, in terms of your question, Joel, I think that in terms of goals, we will talk a lot about innovation, but we also talk about innovation with boldness. We have to be bold in what we're asking for and what we're thinking and what we're envisioning in our communities, and how do we want folks to really be able to thrive and have these enhanced lives. So I think at this moment, if you have to call for an action, is all of us that are practitioners in this industry and that are leading in these organizations, is that we tap into our innovation, but we also tap into our boldness, because I think a lot of that is going to help us move the needle on a lot of these. And we're going to continue to collaborate in a way that we will leverage a lot of the resources that we have at hand and be able to identify ways to move quickly on moving the needle on those. So thank you so much for joining us. This was a great discussion. And I want to turn it back over to Molly, and if we want to have questions, or if any folks dropped anything in the chat, this would be a good time to.
Play some intermission music at this point.
Yeah.
We're scared to open on any other computers unless it kick out the webinar.
Oh.
Nothing that I see here. If you have any questions, submit them now. This is the last session of the day, so we'll be closing the webinar after this. Everybody at home, you can think about the fact that we'll be enjoying our cocktails together in person. And we miss you, but we're happy that we have cocktails.
More for us.
Nothing is coming in, so I think we are ready to wrap. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone at home on the webinar. Thank you for your patience and sticking through with all of the tech issues that we dealt with. Hybrid events are hard, but I'm looking forward to the next time we can do a fully in-person event, and continuing to bring together this network that MIDAS collaborates. I think the key topic that most of these panels and breakouts talked about today was the need for teamwork, the need for collaboration, and that's always how I've thought of MIDAS. So I'm very excited to continue that work into the future.